Hello, my holy brothers and sisters. Let us light up the darkness. Ooh. Who is with us today? Where are you tuning in from? Have you been enjoying this first tractate of the Talmud, Berachos, blessings? It's so rich. I mean, really, every tractate isn't going to be like this. Many of them are going to be very legal, very technical. There's always going to be digressions and great agadata, the stories, the folklore, the sort of illustrative examples that sort of go beyond the mere legalese and into the much more human realm. And I always like those kinds of stories. But this first tractate of the Talmud is just so rich with the agadata and the spirituality and the philosophy. And that's why these sessions are, I'm not doing everything. This isn't a Daf Yomi Shir. It's a Be'eyin Shir, right? The essentials, the crucial highlights. But even just doing the crucial highlights, there's so much that I feel I need to share with you. And this is another such page, Berachos 34, that we're going to be covering today. And here we're going to encounter one of the most famous sayings, one of the most famous phrases in the Talmud. We're going to come to it a little later, but I'll even say it now. Where the penitent stands, even the completely righteous cannot stand, right? And by penitent here, there's sort of different meanings for that. It can be like a former sinner. It can also be, it's often ascribed to the Baal Teshuvah, meaning somebody who became more religious, somebody who became observant, somebody who became shomer mitzvahs, right? A Jew who was previously not following the commandments and sort of came in under the tent of the commandments, as it were, the yoke of the commandments. And where such a person goes, even somebody who has been religious and observant all his life or all her life cannot go. How is that possible, right? The one who was formerly not following the commandments and therefore by definition, had a lot of averas, a lot of sins. How is it possible that he's somehow, at this elevation that somebody who's been living a righteous life their entire life cannot go? And we're going to look at that a little bit later. Welcome, Paul Cowart from Columbus, Georgia. Welcome, Elaine. Welcome, Jeannie. Great to have you here. Jeremy from DC. Stephanie from Virginia. And faithful James Roth from Indianapolis. Great to have you all with us. All right, let's get into it. Today we're going to finish chapter 5 of the first tractate of the Talmud, chapter 5 of Berachos. We've been looking at some of the intentionality behind doing the daily prayer, the Amidah. What do we do when we make mistakes, when we lose focus, when we lose that intentionality? What happens when there's some interruptions, and how is the order of the blessings formulated? It's not a complete history that we've been doing, but these are the topics that we've been covering, and we're going to finish chapter 5 today, and then tomorrow, God willing, with page 35, we'll enter chapter 6, which will be more of a discussion on the blessings, right? It's called blessings, and we're going to get into blessings. The Amidah is the 19 blessings that we say 3 times a day. But tomorrow we'll start discussing, the blessing for bread, the blessing for wine, the blessing for different foods, etc. All right. Here on page 34, now we're discussing the prayer leader, right? So if you go to any service, there's going to be a prayer leader. And what's interesting is what happens when the prayer leader, when a person is asked to be the prayer leader. There's actually a code of conduct for not even just we've already been talking about how he should lead the prayers and what he should do if he makes a mistake, and certain people that we should stop them because it seems like they're leading us in heretical directions. But at the moment that a person is asked to be the prayer leader, our sages teach that for the sake of propriety, the person who's just been asked to be the prayer leader should say no the first time he's asked. The second time he's asked, he should waver. And the third time, he should just go. Right? That's the pattern. Need to remember to unplug this phone because it feels like it always rings when I'm on the air. It doesn't ring that much, that particular line during the day. Okay, so that's the pattern. For the sake of propriety, refusal for the sake of propriety, one who's asked to be the prayer leader should initially refuse, then he should waver, and then he should go. And I think this teaching applies, to whenever people are asked to take on leadership roles, right? You shouldn't jump to it because, first of all, if you're taking on a responsibility like that and you just jump to it, so it seems like you haven't really considered the responsibility that you're assuming, right? If one is going to take leadership seriously, that's a real change of state, right? Not just because now you're going to be given the honor and the power that comes with leadership, but because now you're taking on the awesome responsibility of, leading and caring for and being responsible for the congregation or whatever group you're leading. We shouldn't step into such a role lightly. And one who rushes to do it, it's probably because he's thinking a little bit more about the honor than about what he's actually going to be responsible for as the leader. The second time one should waver because he shouldn't be too difficult. I mean, if he's been asked to take responsibility, he's been asked to take leadership, okay, so then he was needed. She was needed. It's a role that she should take seriously. And then the third time you go, you don't want to be overly difficult. And the sages have a wonderful metaphor for this, right? So first of all, they say that there are three things that are good when used judiciously and bad if too much, right? And so they say leavening, salt, and refusal for the sake of propriety, right? And so just like cooked food with no salt, has bad or no taste, that's a person who, when asked to lead, just rushes right up to it. But if he refuses too much, so that's like cooked food that's ruined by having too much salt, right? So you need that. It's almost like the three bears, right? Like one's too hot, one's too cold, and one is just right. So when asked to lead, refuse, then waver, then go, right? Don't make them ask more than 3 times. And that is like getting the right amount of salt on cooked food. Now, so let's say you become the prayer leader. You were asked to do it, and now you're going to be leading the prayers. If you make an error so now the Amidah, right, the basic structure of the Amidah is that there's the 3 opening blessings. The first is for the patriarchs, the second is for the might of God, and the third is for the holiness of God. And then we have the middle 13 blessings, and then we ask for blessings and help in a variety of things, and it's in that area where we add our personal requests. And then the final 3 blessings, which also function as a unit like the first 3, and the final 3 are the restoration of the temple and the temple service, so we will be able to serve in the temple. Thanksgiving, general thanksgiving to God for all the bounty that he gives us, all the blessings he gives us. And finally, a prayer for peace. So if the leader, or if you're praying alone yourself, if you make a mistake in anywhere in the first 3 blessings, so you should return to the beginning of the first 3 blessings. This is Rav Huna teaches. And if you make a mistake in the final 3 blessings, you return to the first of that group, which is the temple, the prayer for the restoration of the temple. And then in the middle 13, there's a little dispute. So Rav Huna says, if you make a mistake anywhere in that middle 13, you go back to the beginning of that section of 13 blessings. Rav Asi says you can just return to the blessing that you've made a mistake in and say it from there. Just do that one over. And the halacha, the law, is like Rav Asi. So if we make a mistake in the middle 13, we just go back to where we made the mistake and continue from there. Same for the prayer leader. And if we make a mistake in the first 3 or in the last 3, we go to the beginning of that section. Rav Yehuda says we insert our personal requests in the middle 13. It is appropriate to do it in the middle 13, not in the first 3 or the last 3. And as Rabbi Hanina said, we set up our, it's like a servant who approaches the master with a request, something needed. So the first 3, like you praise the master, right? The middle section is where you talk about what you actually need. And in the last 3, it's like a leave taking from the master as if you've received the reward. We don't know if we got rewarded with what we asked for. Very often, a personal request in those middle 13, and we would put this right in the section of healing. Very often, those personal requests are for healing, right? For ourselves, or even more often for others. We pray for the sick. That's just an important and common thing that we pray for in our prayer. And we insert it in the middle of 13 there at the place for healing. So we don't know if the person that we prayed for received a full or partial healing. But when we leave, we act like somebody who received that reward. We're grateful, we're praising, and we don't hold anything back as if we're just going to wait and see whether God fulfills our request or not. We give full praise and full thanks at the end. Speaking of prayer leaders, Rabbi Eliezer would not be perturbed by prayer leaders who went long or short, right? So once there was somebody was leading the prayers in the study hall of Rabbi Eliezer and was prolonging his prayers, just long. And the other people in the room who were not as prominent as Rabbi Eliezer sort of complained to Rabbi Eliezer and said, hey, isn't this guy like taking a little too long? And Rabbi Eliezer said, too long? Is he taking longer than Moses, who was on top of Mount Sinai for 40 days and nights beseeching the Lord? He's quicker than that, so it's good enough for me. And in another incident, somebody was leading the prayers and was flying through really fast, abbreviating things. And somebody in the room complained to Rabbi Eliezer and said, hey, this guy's going too quick. And Rabbi Eliezer said, too quick? Is his prayer shorter than Moses, our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu, who, when his sister Miriam, this is something we'll encounter later in the yearly cycle of Torah reading in a later Parsha, at one point Miriam, and actually her brother, but it was more Miriam started it, sort of spoke ill of Moshe and questioning his motives in an incident involving Moshe's family. And God didn't like it and punished her with saras, this skin condition. And so Moses prayed on her behalf that she should be healed. And his entire prayer was, please, God, heal her, please. That's a really short prayer. It was coming from Moses, so it was a very effective prayer. She was healed. But from Rabbi Eliezer's point of view, is this guy who's leading the prayers, making it any shorter, more abbreviated than Moses did? And Moses' prayer was answered, so I'm not going to complain. I really like that because I feel like, who is a tzaddik? Right? Rabbi Eliezer was a tzaddik. A tzaddik is a righteous person, a completely righteous person. Sometimes, the English word saint doesn't really capture it, but it's just somebody whose heart and mind and actions are all focused on doing God's will at all times. And such a person is not living in a cave somewhere where he's, not going to be distracted by humans in performing God's will. Rather, a tzaddik lives in the world and does God's will in all his relationships with everyone around him. Right? So it's a person who's thoroughly in the world. And such a person, of course, is going to be characterized by kindness and patience and sacrifice and selflessness and being there for others, right? So Rabbi Eliezer, I think what he's teaching here is teaching his students who are allowing themselves to be perturbed by, breaking the routine, right? A prayer leader who has stood up there and he's going very slow or very fast, and they're like, hey, that's not what we're used to. And it's just so easy to complain about something a little bit out of the ordinary. Rabbi Eliezer is saying, hey, you gotta be a little more, what's the word I really want to use here? Unflappable, right? A person who is a tzaddik or striving to be a tzaddik is going to be more unflappable. And that's something that I'm always trying to learn, especially when you have teenagers in the house. It's so easy to become impatient. But if your heart is focused on the one above and that he sent you here with a mission and you've got all the tools that you need, so why are you going to get, so impatient or angry or lose your temper or even annoyed, right? Why even be annoyed by the little stuff? I guess the simplest way to sum up what I'm saying here is don't sweat the small stuff. It's been said many times. But we train ourselves, and it takes great discipline and training not to sweat the small stuff. But if we can, make progress in that goal of becoming somebody who doesn't sweat the small stuff, so then when the big stuff that comes along, that invariably does, because no life is easy, we'll be more ready for it, right? Training ourselves to not sweat the small stuff will ready us for the big challenges in life. And we learn that from Rabbi Eliezer in this in this section here on this page 34 of Berachos in the Talmud. Okay, we continue as we're finishing up some of these practices associated with the Amidah, the 3 times a day basic prayer with 19 blessings in it. So bowing. When do we bow in the Amidah? So there are 4 bows in the Amidah that we make. The first and second are at the beginning and end of the first blessing, right? So the first blessing of the Amidah is for the patriarchs, right? So praising God, who is the God of our patriarchs, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their merit. We invoke their merit right at the top of the prayer, because the truth is, all of us are so flawed in so many ways. And if God hadn't promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he would have a special regard for their descendants forever, so we would really be quaking in our boots, because we've let our people down, ourselves down, we've let God down so many times. But right at the top, we said, but you promised that you were going to take care of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob forever. So, I come before you trembling, and please remember that I'm one of their descendants, right? And so we bow at the beginning of that blessing, and we bow at the end of that blessing. When we say, blessed are you, Lord our God, the shield of Abraham, right? That's the second bow. And the first bow, let me get, we just do this because we're so used to it. And these words really do come off the tongue easily because they're repeated so much. But if we're just being careful to translate properly, why don't I just get a prayer book open? Right, so when we start, we bow with, blessed are you, Lord our God, and God of our fathers, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, the great, mighty, and awesome God. And so we bow right there. And by the way, the way we bow is we bow on Baruch, blessed, and we straighten up for you, right? When we say Baruch, we say Baruch Atah, right? So blessed are you, and then we straighten up when we say God's name. Right, Baruch Atah, now I'm teaching it. So Baruch Atah Adonai, that name of God. On Adonai we straighten up, right? Because we say in the morning blessings that God straightens the bent, right? So we show our humility by bowing first, but at his name we straighten up, which is, I think, a really beautiful teaching. It's like, that's a loving relationship, that he straightens us up. We don't stay down. And there's an interesting exception to that. I'll get in a minute. But those first 2 bows at the beginning of the prayer and the first blessing, and then we bow again at the conclusion of that blessing. So God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, the great, mighty, and awesome God, exalted God, who bestows bountiful kindness, who creates all things, who remembers the piety of the patriarchs, invoking their merit right away, and who in love brings a Redeemer to their children's children, for the sake of his name, because he swore by his eternal name to look out for their descendants. O King, helper, a helper, a savior, and a shield. And then we bow again. Blessed are you, Adonai, shield, right? Magen, shield of Abraham. Then we say all these prayers, and we'll bow again, in the 17th blessing, the second to last blessing, which is the Thanksgiving blessing. So we've gone the whole Amidah journey, and right near the end, it's the 18th blessing, because there are 19 blessings. And so in the 18th, the prayer of the blessing of Thanksgiving, that is when we bow again. At the beginning, we say Moedim, Anachnu Lach, thankful are we. And then at the very end of that, Baruch Atah Adonai, the word exactly, to whom it is fitting to give thanks. I'm pretty sure it's the translation. Hold on. Yeah. Blessed are you, Lord, right? We bow there. Beneficent is your name, and to you it is fitting to offer thanks. So those are the 4 bows. And I will confess, until I studied that, I was doing 3 of them. I was just so accustomed to that. And even in my not very observant childhood, I went to synagogue enough. And I had a bar mitzvah, and I knew about the first 2 bows. Those are very ingrained. And I knew that you bow at the Modim, when we all bow to say thanks. But then there's that 4th bow, right, where we say, blessed are you, to whom is fitting to give thanks. And I don't know, like no one ever told me to bow that 4th bow. And, we're always like I'm always in the midst of my own thing, and I never noticed what other people are doing. And I think that bow, people do it, but it's like kind of quick. And it's easy to not notice, no matter how observant and religious the people are around you. So that 4th bow at the end of the Modim, when we say, blessed are you, Lord our God, beneficent is your name, and it is to you it is fitting to give thanks, right? Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha, ulecha na'eh lehodos, right? So there, beneficent is your name, or good is your name, and to you it is fitting to give thanks. That's that 4th bow in the Amidah. Very good. The exception to this, of people who do this, those are the rules for everybody except 2 people. There are 2 people who have different rules on the bowing than everyone else. The high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and the king of Israel. The Kohen Gadol, right, who's charged with the most important job in spiritual, religious, holy matters, right? The high priest, the one who does the Yom Kippur service, the one in charge. There are things that are only for the high priest to do, and he has to live at a completely exalted state and remain pure. And he may not marry certain people. He may not enter a cemetery. He may not become impure through corpse impurity, except under very special circumstances. He's the high priest. The high priest, when he prays the Amidah 3 times a day, he has to bow for every single one of the 19 blessings. Because his state is so honored and exalted, he has to go out of his way to show that he is humble and dedicated to God, lest the position go to his head. And the king of Israel has to bow for the first blessing at the top of the Amidah, like blessed are you, right, God of the patriarchs. He bows, and he stays bowed. He stays with his head down, bowed, for the entire Amidah. And he only straightens up at the very end. Who do we learn that from? King Solomon, who said, when the temple was inaugurated, that he bowed, and then he only straightened up from his prayer at the very end, and so it kind of went on with the ceremonies of the day. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa is one of these saints, right? Hanina ben Dosa is not just a tzaddik; he's like a tzaddik, a tzaddik among tzaddikim, righteous among the righteous. Right, so this was a rabbi. He was a student, a disciple of Yochanan ben Zakkai. Yochanan ben Zakkai was in charge of the Torah scholars. He was the head rabbi at the time that the temple fell. And he was the one who was able to petition the Roman general to let him take his scholars out of Jerusalem and sort of set up shop, set up the Academy of Learning in the little town of Yavne. And it was Yochanan ben Sakkai's leadership and the group with him that started this project of transitioning Judaism from a temple-based, sacrifice-based religion to a more spiritual, prayer-based religion. And it took them hundreds of years to work it out. And that's what the Talmud is, right? They're working it out, what this new religion would be. It's not a new religion, but it would be the same religion with adjustments made for people living in diaspora and without the Holy Temple, around which so many of our laws and so much of our spirituality had been based until it was destroyed, till the Second Temple was destroyed. And we're still in that 2,000-year exile waiting for the Third Temple to be restored. Hanina ben Dosa was a disciple of Yochanan ben Sakkai. He was poor and indigent all the days of his life. He did not care about materiality, about objects, possessions, money, status, wealth, nothing. He was totally dedicated to God and to Torah. But he was at such a level of nearness to the Lord, right? He ached for the Lord. And he was so near to the Lord that his prayers had miraculous power, particularly in the area of healing, right? So, back then, they didn't have medical doctors like we have now. There were just a lot of conditions. They didn't know what was going on, just that the person was sick. They had no, way to cure the sickness, and people would often die of these kinds of sicknesses that now we routinely cure. But back then, for a lot of these people, the only hope was a prayer from Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. And Hanina shared with the people around him that he knew when one of these healing prayers was going to work, right? When it had been heard in the sense of it will be answered and granted, if the prayer was fluent on his tongue, right? And we can imagine that, so probably not all his prayers were fluent all the time, or he wasn't praying for miraculous healing all the time. But when he did, when he was needed and he agreed and was praying, for somebody's miraculous healing, he would know that it was going to be granted if that prayer came easily off his tongue. But if he made mistakes, if he stammered, if for some reason the prayer didn't come out of him with some fluency, then he knew that it wasn't going to be heard. And that was sort of like his, for him, it was the feedback. It was the feedback signal. And we're not saying that this applies to everybody. First of all, very few of us, ever have miraculous answers to our prayers. But this is being brought down on this page of this idea that we want, if we pray every day, so we get better at it, right? And it comes off our tongues a little bit more easily, particularly at the beginning. That first blessing of the Amidah, when we invoke the piety of the patriarchs and the love that God had for the patriarchs, and invoke that love that it should extend to us because we're the descendants and we need mercy, right? That prayer should come off, easily, smoothly. And if we stutter, if we make an error in that, something that we say every day, 3 times a day at least, if we're leading the prayers, we say it silently, and then, there's a silent one, and then the repetition of the prayer leader in the morning and afternoon service. Right? So if you're the leader at both of those services, you're saying this prayer 5 times a day. So, there's no reason why you wouldn't know it and know it really well. And if for some reason you make a mistake, because your mind is elsewhere, you're on focus, whatever, people make mistakes, then, it's sort of like a bad sign. So we want to avoid that. We want to avoid receiving that bad omen. Something else may be going on in our lives, that maybe we deserve, God forbid, punishment or who knows what. But here they're saying that if we stumble in that first bracha, that first blessing, that it's a bad omen, okay? And we're learning it from Hanina ben Dosa, who said, but when it's smooth, for him it was a signal that it's heard. Now we're not at his level, So maybe the stumbling is not such a bad sign, and having it be fluent is not such a good sign. But it's something to strive for. And particularly the idea here is not only that it should be smooth, but that we should be focused on it, right? Not only that there's many things that we can say easily, just right out of our mouth, a whole flow of words, because we've said it thousands of times, and there's no connection to it. Our minds are not in it. But what the sages are telling us here is we need to have intentionality and focus throughout the Amidah, but especially in that first bracha, in that first blessing of the Amidah. And while we're talking about, the tongue being fluent, we get a teaching from Isaiah, who said, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, as the verse stated, this is from Isaiah chapter 57, verse 19. As the verse stated, the Lord that creates the expression of the lips, right? So this is a trope that we'll often see, in our daily prayers. We'll say, the one who created the eye, does he not see? The one who created the ear, does he not hear? In terms of God sees what's going on in the world, and arrogant people think God doesn't. So it's that same kind of idea. Here we're saying the one who creates the expression of the lips God says, peace, peace to him that is far off and to him that is near, and I will heal him. Right? So this is being brought down in the context of Hanina ben Dosa, who could pray and obtain miraculous healing for people. And it can be inferred from this verse that if speech of the lips, fluent speech, is granted to one who prays, it is indicated that his prayer on behalf of the ill has been accepted, and God will heal him, and that person will be healed. Right? So that's how they're using this verse. From that verse, they derive some more teachings, because what they're wondering about, what does it mean, the one who is far off and the one who is near? And so now they start to speculate on that. And they talk about that all the prophets said, there's a reward for the righteous, right? So what is the reward for the righteous? And is the righteous one the one who is near or the one who is far? And what is the nature of that reward? And so they start to say that the reward for the righteous, the reward that the prophets prophesy about, is a reward that we won't see it. Right? The righteous won't receive their reward in this world. And this is going back to a question we've already come across a few times. The biggest question that people will ask people of faith, but look, if your God is so great, why are there righteous people suffering and why are wicked people prospering? And here the answer is given. Well, the reward that the prophet said the righteous will receive, because God is just, we're not going to see it in this lifetime or in this world. We're going to see it in the days of the Messiah. Right? That's when the reward will be. But then they make a distinction between the days of the Messiah and the world to come. Now, this distinction is not consistent in the Talmud. Sometimes the Messianic age and the world to come are sort of equated, and it's like they're talking about the same thing. But here, they're being careful to make a distinction. And the days of the Messiah, it will be great. It will be incredibly beautiful. But it will resemble this world. I mean, the days of Messiah will happen on earth with living beings and people in bodies. The dead will come back, but they will have bodies and they will live in this physical world. The world to come is beyond the physical world. Here, at other times, that's called the world of souls, right? And that place, the reward in the world of souls for the righteous is unknowable. We can imagine the reward that will happen in the days of the Messiah. We can't even imagine the reward that will be in this version of the world to come, the world of souls, beyond the physical world. Here it's also taught that in the Messianic time there will still be poor people, right? And it's like, what? Isn't everybody going to be in paradise? But no, it's more like this world. There just won't be. But there won't be other problems. There won't be war, there won't be disease, there won't be famine. In terms of the Jews, they won't be persecuted. Israel will be restored, and the temple will be restored, and it will be beautiful in that way. And that's a knowable reward. Then they start saying, well, okay, it's not necessarily about the distinction between the reward in the Messianic times and in the world to come, but rather it's a different distinction that is being made. And here we have that Rabbi Chaya bar Abba said that Rabbi Yochanan said all of the prophets only prophesied their prophecies of consolation with regard to penitents, right, former sinners. But with regard to the full-fledged righteous, it is stated, no eye has seen it, God, aside from you. So now they're saying that the knowable reward is for the penitents, and the extreme unknowable reward that's amazing and unimaginable, that's for the people who've been righteous all their lives. But this statement disagrees with the famous opinion of Rabbi Abahu, who holds that penitents, right, former sinners, are superior to the completely righteous, the ones who've been righteous all their lives. As Rabbi Abahu said, in the place where penitents stand, even the full-fledged righteous do not stand. As it is stated, peace, peace upon him who is far and him who is near. So the one who is far is mentioned first, and he's in a place where even the completely righteous cannot stand. They don't get into a big analysis of this saying. I think we're going to find it again. And what does it really mean? And one of the details that goes along with this idea is that the former sinner, because he is able to make teshuvah, because he's able to make an atonement and change himself. So he's actually done something that one who was righteous all his life just didn't have an opportunity to do. That doesn't mean that one who is righteous all his life should go and commit a sin just so that he can atone, so that he can go stand at that place where the penitent goes. There is a reward, and an ample reward, for one who resists that, right? Who was born righteous in a righteous family and was able to maintain righteousness all his life. And indeed, here we have this other opinion that person has, a reward that is beyond. But in terms of the one who is a penitent, the former sinner who comes around and makes that atonement, the reward for him is that not only he gets this incredible great reward, but the sins that he committed are actually transformed into merits. That's how great teshuvah is. And by the way, how many people are really righteous their entire lives and never made a mistake? I mean, it's just every human being has made mistakes, so we all have this opportunity, right? Whatever our past sins are, when we make sincere atonement, those past sins are transformed into merits for us. And that is the teaching of Rabbi Abahu, that where the penitent stands, even the completely righteous cannot stand. Very important, powerful teaching here on Berachos 34. Okay, we covered this, that the days of the Messiah are similar to our world, the penitent versus the full-fledged. Very good. And then finally, we have this little incident that's related about Hanina ben Dosa, right? This miracle worker in terms of healing, who never prayed for anything for himself, right? Somebody with such a powerful spirituality, such a powerful connection to God, could have used that connection and asked for reward for himself, at least that he should have a 2-bedroom apartment instead of like a hovel in a really nasty part of town. I mean, he just really lived with nothing, never cared about his own material well-being at all. But the leaders of his generation, both Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabban Gamliel, who was installed as the Nasi, the head of the academy once they moved over to Yavne, both of them in separate incidents had a son who was very, very ill, like at death's door, with a fever that they were not able to cure, with medicine as it was at that time. They sent for Hanina ben Dosa to pray for their sons. And in both cases, the son was healed. Rabban Gamliel couldn't come personally, but he sent 2 distinguished scholars to ask Hanina ben Dosa to pray for his son. Hanina ben Dosa did that, prayed for them, and told the scholars that Rabban Gamliel's son is healed. How do you know? I know that because the prayer was fluent coming out of my mouth. That is the sign for me, for Hanina ben Dosa. And they wrote down exactly the time when he said that. Back then, right? No phone, no telegram, no quick communication. They came walking, maybe it took them a couple days. Then they went back to Rabban Gamliel, and indeed the son had been healed, and they related that they wrote down exactly the time when they heard from Hanina ben Dosa that the son was healed. And Rabban Gamliel said, I swear, by all that's holy, that is exactly the time when my son's fever broke and he asked us for some water. And so the question is, what is it about Hanina ben Dosa that made him so holy and able to achieve these miracles? Was he greater in Torah learning and scholarship than Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabban Gamliel? And the answer is no. They were greater than him in their scholarship and in their ability, to divine the truth from Scripture and share it with the people, right? We're not belittling their achievement in any way. They were greater than Hanina ben Dosa according to the standards of the sages, right? What's most important among Talmudic rabbis is their ability to discern truth from Scripture and then to communicate that truth to the people so that they will, share in that wisdom and conduct themselves according to God's will. So they were greater, much greater than Hanina ben Dosa in that sense. Yet they were not granted this power, to pray and obtain miracles for people that were sick. So what was it about Hanina ben Dosa? And it was Yochanan ben Zakkai who said that Hanina ben Dosa's relationship with God was that of a servant and a master, whereas Yochanan ben Zakkai's relationship, or a servant and a king, and Yochanan's relationship was that of a minister and a king, like a government minister, right? So a government minister deals with super important stuff, right? But he doesn't see the king as often as the servant does. And when he does see the king, he has to, stick to the important matters of state, right? And not get into like personal requests for family members of the family to be healed, etc. The servant who's always there, filling the king's cup or cleaning crumbs off the floor in front of the king, straightening his pillow, bringing him a blanket, whatever it is, he's a much more humble type of person, but his relationship with the king is also more personal, more emotional. And so while the minister is more important, that servant is nearer to the king and is able to make these requests, for other people. But what he doesn't do is make requests for himself, right? Hanina was never asking for stuff for himself, and that's why he lived so incredibly humbly and modestly. But we can imagine that a saint, right, a true tzaddik who lived his life that way, so the reward for him, right, and that's a lifelong tzaddik. He wasn't a penitent. He's somebody who lived his whole life that way. But for that man to live at such a state of self-nullification and being there for others and just being there to do God's will and loving him and, just willing to live so humbly, the reward for that man must be immense. And hopefully we'll all meet and chat and hang out with Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa when we reach the world to come. Okay, that's the end of Daf 34. Page 34 here in the first tractate, Berachos, and that's going to be the end of chapter 5. When we pick it up tomorrow, with God's help, we'll get into blessings themselves, right? Blessings over food, blessings over fragrances, the categories of these blessings, when we use them, how we use them, etc. I think the takeaway for today, first of all, let's just remember this saying. It's a really famous one, and it's just worth keeping in our minds, right? That where a penitent stands, even the completely righteous cannot stand. So a guy like Hanina ben Dosa, he's the completely righteous. And somehow, we can get even closer to God than Hanina ben Dosa. And it's, right, unbelievable how close he was to God. But we can get even closer for moments, at times in our lives, right? When we realize we've made a mistake, and then we make that sincere tshuva, that sincere atonement, right? Where we grasp the totality of what we've done, we understand it, we feel holy shame as opposed to crippling shame. Holy shame means we get the totality of what we've done, but we also know that God gives us the strength to make an atonement and to make a repair and to move forward, right? And then we're going to sort of use that former sin to power righteous behavior in the future. And then when we're tested, eventually that opportunity comes up again to do the wrong that we did in the past, and then we do it right. So then that past sin gets transformed into a merit for us. All right, my friends, let me just review if there are any questions here. Lana Coprin really liked that story of Hanina Mendoza. Alice says, may it be soon with Mashiach. Amen. Stephanie says, what about the bowing to the left and right during the Oseh Shalom at the very end of the Amidah? Great question. So that's different than the bowing of the blessings. That's a bowing at the end, and we also do that same bow when we say Kaddish, right? When we leave the room in Kaddish. And I haven't studied those bows. Those are different bows. Those are different bows. But I suspect, right, what is that bow about? I mean, this is the same question we might ask. Kaddish, we say it several times in each of our services. It's actually in Aramaic, not in Hebrew. And we're basically saying, holy, holy, and exalted and magnificent is God. And the most well-known use of Kaddish is when someone has died, right? Yesterday I was at a Shiva Minyan. A person died in our neighborhood, in our community. He was buried in Israel. So the children were actually in Israel. The children weren't even there to sit Shiva, but the daughter asked that we have a Shiva Minyan in the man's house who died. So 10 of us gathered there because there's a trace of his soul still at the home that he lived in for so many years. And we were there to comfort him and to comfort her, knowing that this minyan was happening in her father's house. And somebody talked about this. Why are we exalting God at the very moment that this person has been taken, right? And one of the reasons is because every person has a unique mission in this world. And when they die, who's going to fulfill that mission? Who is the person that's going to fulfill the mission that the one who's dead can no longer fulfill? And we say, we trust you, God, that you will keep sustaining the earth. You sustain everything around us. So the three bows that Stephanie just asked about, we bow to the left, to the right, and center. When we say, Oseh Shalom b'mrumav, Hu Yaseh Shalom. So instead of me translating that, it's the maker of heaven and earth, right? But the way we say it, he who makes peace in the heavens, may he make peace for us and for all Israel, and say amen. And we're saying that he makes, right? He makes peace. He sustains the world. It doesn't fall apart. And he does that everywhere. And the one who is missing, God should please pick up the slack and then send us, send us another person who can fulfill a mission that was similar. I'm not prepared to answer your question, but I need to learn a little bit more about those three bows. But those three bows are outside the Amidah, right? So these are just kind of like additional prayers that Oseh Shalom b'mrumav we add at the end of Amidah. It's not really part of the Amidah. The Amidah itself ends when we bless God for making peace, just shortly before that, right? When the Amidah ends when we say Baruch atah Adonai hambarach samo Yisrael b'shalom. That's the official end of the Amidah. And then we add, customarily, O Lord, guard my lips from speaking lies, from speaking evil, and my lips from speaking deceitfully. Let my soul be silent to those who curse me. Let my soul be as dust to all, etc. And that, I think, is a transition that we do after the Amidah, because if we went to great heights, like we would hope to go every time we pray, so this kind of helps us transition and bring that fire back from the mountain. And I think that's what that prayer at the end is really about, in the Oseh Shalom that concludes that transitional thing. But it's not the Amidah, it's the additional stuff after the Amidah. And Jose says, I once heard we also say Kaddish because we needed to console God. I thought that was a beautiful thought. I love that. And God tells us that he mourns, right, when his creatures suffer and when his creatures are killed. And saying that we're consoling God, it's very beautiful. It doesn't diminish God in any way. But when the angels celebrated that the Egyptians, who were in the chariots, who were pursuing the children of Israel, leaving Egypt, right? So a miracle was performed that they crossed the Red Sea. The sea was parted. We crossed through. And then the army of chariots chased us in. And then the waters closed on them. And then that was the end, of Pharaoh's army and of the persecution and the end of our slavery and the end of our bondage in Egypt. And after that, it's a new story about wandering in the desert. But the angels, the angels who cared about Israel in heaven celebrated, and our sages say that God rebuked the angels and said, what are you celebrating for? A bunch of my children just perished in the sea. So even though Pharaoh was evil and his servants were extending that evil and trying to, recreate or reestablish that slavery, still they were human, and they were humans who died in that event, right? So yes, whenever a human dies in this world, God mourns, as it were, for that loss. Okay. Alice says, Chabad tradition to add our Hebrew name after the Amidah. I need to learn more about that, but I do need to end this show now. So thank you, my pals, for joining us today. Sending you lots of love from LA, and look forward, God willing, to continuing with page 35 of Berachos tomorrow on Erev Shabbos.